So one of the big things I think is important when thinking about like why did I leave or why did I quit? A lot of people maybe have like a dramatic exit. Mine was more what do the numbers say, what's the data, and what does my gut say? It looked like some of it, to be honest, like did I make a mistake? That creates another spiral of guilt because you're not where you want to be. There's a big disconnect between having an impressive resume and having wealth. And a lot of times people will lead with what they do and the degrees that they have. And then that adds another added layer of shame because their net worth or their income doesn't reflect the level of advancement that they've been able to make, the decisions they've been able to make to advance in their career, go up that ladder or start that business. And it doesn't reflect in their bank account.
Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast exploring life-changing career moves. I'm your host, Brian Acard. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the bold decisions that transform their careers and lives. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. Money isn't just about numbers. It's about the stories we often tell ourselves. Stories that can either empower us or hold us hostage. My guest today, Kara Stevens, believes every woman is a revolution unto herself. And through the Frugal Feminista, she's helping thousands rewrite their money stories and reclaim their financial power. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So my guest today is Kara Stevens, an author, speaker, and founder of the Frugal Feminista, a platform dedicated to helping women heal their relationship with money and embrace abundance. Her practical yet soulful advice has been featured in The Washington Post, USA Today, Black Enterprise, and more. And her latest book, Heal Your Relationship with Money, guides readers through 28 days of lessons to release financial dysfunction and find peace with their money. But before she found her true calling, she worked in education. And so I'm excited to talk with her all about that. So Kara, welcome to Why I Left. How you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, I've loved your journey, and I appreciate you reaching out when we connected. And would love for you to share just a bit about your journey before the Frugal Feminista. You know, what shaped your early relationship with money and even purpose?
Well, thanks for asking that. I think that sometimes you find the purpose after all the things happen, the sequence of events. It's never, some people maybe get it ahead of time where it's like, oh, I know what I want to do. But I realized that I really wanted to help people heal their relationship with money. When I graduated from college, I had student loan debt, I had credit card debt, I had no intention of paying either back because I thought that if I ghosted them, they would get the message that I was not going to pay back this money. And it wasn't until the balances kept on going up. And I happened to open up a Discover card bill in front of my mother. And I was kind of venting and complaining to her. I was like, I can't believe this balance is going up, mom. Like, don't they know I'm not going to pay for it? And she looked at me like I was crazy. She goes, that's interest and late fees, child. And it's almost like she questioned her whole parenting. She's like, oh my God, you did not realize that, but I didn't. And I had graduated from a very prestigious 4-year liberal arts school with a degree in economics and political science, ironically, but there's no relationship to that of personal finance. And so one thing I did know how to do, I didn't know how to write, I didn't know how to research. So I went to the library, local library, and asked the librarian, do you have any books about money? And she was like, yeah. And that was when I was introduced to the section on personal finance. And I found a few books, one of which was written by a Black woman, Linda Bridgeforth. And it was the first time I had ever heard a concept of getting your finances in order because I knew I had signed credit cards. I mean, I knew I had signed up for credit cards in college when they put those stands on campus. And I knew I had signed up for student loans, but I didn't know what that meant. I was 17. And so by 22, 23, when these bills are coming in, you're not paying them. I was like, oh, wow, there's an actual consequence if I continue this avoidance. And then there's a long story, but I finally got out of the debt, even as a teacher. But then I started a position where I was making more than enough. But these feelings of scarcity and sadness and anxiety and distrust around money lingered. And so then it clicked. that it's not necessarily the amount of money that you have that determines your relationship with money. It's all the feelings and thoughts and emotions around it. And then I was able to track it back to growing up, single parent. My mom was left by her husband, my father, leaving her to raise me and my brother by herself. And all the messages she had taught me about risk, about relationships, about money, that was when I started to realize that I had some unpacking and some healing to do in order for me to, one, enjoy money, two, think there's enough money, three, take risks to go after what I want in life, because sometimes how you relate to risk is manifest in how you manage your money. In order for me to actually have a balanced, healthy, happy life.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to that. And I've had similar conversations with folks around that their upbringing with money and how it really impacts, truthfully their future. So I'm glad you were able to recognize it when you did. So that is like a nice foundation for what eventually you then get into. So what inspired you then to start Frugal Feminista and step into this role as an author and advocate for women's financial healing?
Well, similar to like I said, I was in debt. I didn't know how to get out of debt. And so I read about it. And when I was also in college, I was the editor in chief of the literary magazine. So I like to write. And I process through writing and I share through writing. And so the title of that book was Girl, Get Your Money Straight. And I started a blog spot back in the day when blog spots were a thing called Girl Get Your Life Together as a nod to all the things I had been learning in that book. And by that time, I was just completely obsessed with learning as much as I could about personal finance, but then translating it into language and ideas and concepts that a 20-year-old could identify with, because a lot of the authors I was reading, I was in my 20s, they were in their 40s and 50s. So a lot of my friends wouldn't necessarily be interested in hearing what a 50-year-old has to say about money, but they'll be able to understand it through the frame of a 20-year-old who's going through the same things, breaking it down, sharing their experiences. And then so that is really how I started on that journey of like, okay, now that I know I have this problem, here's what I'm doing about it. Let me create some not I didn't understand the concept of content. Let me share, let me write. And that is how it started. And then I needed an extra job. So I pitched my writing to a local newspaper in Brooklyn, a Black owned newspaper, and they needed a column on personal finance. And I was like, okay, it was $50 a column. And I thought I was making $1 million because I was like, wow, someone wants to hear what I have to say. It felt great to share. And then from there, I started to change platforms. Like instead of writing for somebody else, I started to write for myself. And then I was invited to write for other platforms. And then I learned more about the world of blogging and business moving forward.
I love that, and Blogspot is a throwback. I have not heard that name in some time. One of the things I opened with was around how you were also a teacher, right? And so we talk a lot here around career transitions, these pivots, and the decisions that lead to them. And so I'd love to go back to that time when you were a teacher. What was going on then when you decided it was time to leave education?
So I think one of the big things I think is important when thinking about like why did I leave or why did I quit? A lot of people maybe have like a dramatic exit. Mine was more I'm a methodical person, so mine was more what do the numbers say, what's the data, and what does my gut say? So it's a combination. So I was a teacher and I was growing the Feminista on the side for a really long time. And so I love my students. I worked in my community. I became an assistant principal, a school leader, and I realized that I did not want to, there was nothing more that I could do in terms of wanting to do more of what I was doing. Being an assistant principal allowed me a flexibility. Being an assistant principal allowed me to stay close to the students and to the staff in a way that being a principal wouldn't allow me to. And then I realized that even in that position, I was outgrowing it. I had put in systems and structures and programs, things that I was very, very proud of, that if middle school Kara could see what adult Kara was doing, she would have been like, I would have loved to have gone to a school like that or been around programming like that. And I knew that I was done. And I also knew I promised myself that my sixth graders would, when they became eighth graders, I would make sure I wrap everything up so I can see their exit, right? So I feel like I had a clean little loop. At the same time, I was working diligently on the Frugal Feminista for it to replace my income as an administrator. Because also around that time, in addition to looking around and realizing that I had done all the things that I could and wanted to do in education in this particular way, I we were talking about what are our values. And at that time, it was during 2020 or post COVID. And we were like, you know what? We don't want to look back after 30 years and just say that we worked our whole lives and didn't take advantage of what we believed in education was supposed to do, which was to give us options. And so we decided that we would plan to move to Ghana and what that took to move to Ghana, the finances, the planning, and kind of like an exit plan. And that also included making sure the Fugu Feminista had strong enough legs to at least survive the transition from being US based to online based. And that was kind of the decision. I think the best thing for me in that was even when there were downs and lows with the Frugal Feminista, that I knew that it would be my ticket to leaving in a way that made emotional and financial sense for me because I'm an emotional, financially rooted person.
Makes a lot of sense. What did that leaving look like for the first, let's say 30, 60, 90 days? So after you got the eighth graders through,
Mhm.
you went that, you decided to make those moves. What did
Yeah.
those first few months look like?
Moving to Ghana or
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
yeah.
Just
Um,
leaving and then moving to Ghana. Yeah.
Yeah, so it looked like some of it, to be honest, like, did I make a mistake, right? I know a lot of conversations around to Ghana, especially for certain community or Black communities. It's like it's the best thing. You get to be around people that look like you all the time, and it's like a coming home or a homecoming. And I think for me, because I had been to Ghana I had been to Ghana a long time ago as a student, and I had been to Ghana in the 3 years that we were planning to, uh, relocate, and my husband is Ghanaian. Moving to Ghana versus visiting Ghana came into very much close contact with the differences, if that makes sense. So, sometimes there would be no electricity, sometimes there would be no lights, sometimes you would put an order in for something and then the timeline it didn't mirror the customer service that you don't realize you're accustomed to as an American. And so the first 60 to 90 days was just experience or an exploration of how much do you want to make it work, right? And so we created solutions for each of those things. So we bought solar panels, right? We got Starlink for internet, so we wouldn't have to rely on local internet and electricity. We bore a hole. We did like a bore hole where we kind of live off the grid when it comes to water. I mean, these are things that we decided that were these inconveniences and infrastructural inconveniences, did they outweigh the goal of raising our daughter in a place where everyone looked like her? She had more time to be a kid. She had more space to run about. Was it worth it, or was there a trade off? And so I would say even the first year, it was we staying, and then the second year was like, how am I going to make my money?
Right.
Because a lot of my with the Frugal Feminista before moving was in-person speaking, and with COVID, things shifted, but a lot of my clients would still want in-person, even if it's not 100% of it. If I were to have a client for, say, 5 speaking engagements or a series, they'll at least want you there for 1, the first and the last one, and you can do the rest virtual. So it was like, will I be able to maintain those relationships, those business relationships, or will I have to find alternatives? And come to find out after now being 2 years here, some of them sustained because I've been able to coordinate my visits to the US with one client and then work around with others. So it makes sense to stay for like 3 or 4 weeks and then be able to meet my clients' needs. But other things I've realized is that moving away also means moving away. And so it may mean having to do things virtually and creating that as like your main source. And I was happy, I guess, to answer your question in those first 60 to 90 days to explore that because we had to make plans financially to understand that everything wasn't going to go smoothly.
Many of my guests often talk about the loneliness of big transitions. Did you feel that? And if so, what community design did you build, whether it's, a pod, peer pod, anything like that, so you weren't exactly moving alone? I know obviously your spouse was there with you, but what else did you have with you to make sure you weren't moving along?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Community and finding community has been still a top priority. I would go to the equivalent of Eventbrite in West Africa and find events. So events that were like wellness centered or business centered. Or even things that were like expat centered. I would attend those things and kind of network there. That's fun. Two, going to the gym and creating your own routine where you can meet people. So things that you may do for functional reasons like exercise. You think about how can I do this functional thing in a social way so you have a chance of meeting people. So I will go to the gym and then go at a regular time to see people. I made friends with a woman who I took boxing classes with and took them at the same time. So that kind of became a friendship. I pursued interests at schools where I used my talents and transferred my skills to teach teachers about data driven instruction so I could become part of a education community here and just kind of hop around until I found things. And then what I'm doing now is similar like in my business world, how can I bring people to me? I'm starting a cafe hop and read group where I don't like book clubs because it feels like more homework, where everyone just kind of brings what they're doing, reads for a little while, does their work for a little while, and then we kind of hang out, and meet each other. So I think you have to be multi-pronged, and my husband is from here, so there's that family piece, but creating my own community, I think is especially, I would say 2 years is still a short period of time. Just imagine moving away to a different state that you're not from, thinking about moving to a different country. It's very similar in a lot of ways. So I think it's always being out and about, but also when you get older, realizing it may take longer because people are already settled into their routines.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And you raised something good. I think that's one of the reasons I don't like book clubs because it feels like homework. It's like every year I strive to read more. Like I'm a big article junkie, but books, sometimes it's a struggle. But I've always not been a fan of book clubs because it's like, oh, yeah, we're going to do this chapter by this week. And then it's like, it gets down to the wire. I'm like, oh my God. All right. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. So in some of the work that I've seen of yours, you say all of us have a money story, which I
Mhm.
wholeheartedly agree with. What do you mean by that? And how can people begin to uncover their own money story?
Yeah, what I mean by that is that if I were to ask you, Brian, like when you think about money, what are the top three words or phrases or feelings that come to mind? And you'll probably have more than two or three. And I can bet you that each of those feelings or each of those words are attached to some type of memory. And it's a pattern of stories, it's a pattern of memories that lead you to kind of associate money with this thing, this feeling, this idea. And that idea is the seed of a story and a narrative that you tell yourself all the time about what money is and what money isn't. And for a lot of us, the first chapters of that money story are established by people that aren't us, our parents, our religious institutions, media. And if you're not able to filter that through your own values as you get older, you're likely to follow in the same patterns and the same belief systems that these, whether individuals or institutions, have put forth, without really rethinking, does this actually serve what I feel, what my values are, and ultimately what I want to do and what I have when it comes to money or anything that's related to money, which is like, options, certain places to live, certain places to be, places to explore, people to be with.
Yeah, and a lot of times with these types of topics, shame and guilt come up with
Mhm.
money. And so how do those specific feelings and emotions about money show up specifically for women? And how did those narratives shape your own transition decisions, which you talked a little bit about earlier?
Well, I think especially for the women I work with are usually women of color and even just women in general. And there are societal expectations, spoken, unspoken, about what money should mean to us at those various levels. And so a lot of it is shame driven, or we're infantilized in terms of saying, I can give a couple of examples. Like, women are taught that talking about money makes you a gold digger, right? And you have messages, especially specifically for women of color, that your money, especially if you're a single Black woman, that your money is your family's money, right? You have messages of you can't go out the house looking crazy. So your appearance and how much you spend on how you look is a priority for protection, for a number of things to make sure that you are accepted, you're not rejected. And I think the shame and the guilt come along because what ends up happening is that we hear these stories, we attach them to our self worth. And then when we don't examine the lack of truth and veracity of those ideas, they continue to guide our behaviors and actions around money, which are really counter to what we actually want to do and what we want to have when it comes to money. And then that creates another spiral of guilt because you're not where you want to be, right? One. And then two, there's a disconnect, especially if you're talking this podcast is about professionals. There's a big disconnect between having an impressive resume and having wealth. And a lot of times people will lead with what they do and the degrees that they have. And then that adds another added layer of shame because their net worth or their income doesn't reflect the level of advancement that they've been able to make, the decisions they've been able to make to advance in their career, go up that ladder or start that business, and it doesn't reflect in their bank account. And so there's a desire to hide and pretend that things are going well because on the one end, you're a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a teacher, a principal, an engineer. But when you look inside your behaviors, your beliefs, and your finances, you're still that 7 or 17-year-old that still hasn't unpacked the relationships with money that were handed down to you from those various sources that too weren't that informed or financially literate to give you a solid foundation in order for you to see money as a tool, see it as something positive that can at least neutral, and see it as something that can grow, something that's not meant to be spent only, something that's not meant to be hoarded only, something that doesn't represent who you are. But we don't have those conversations. Sometimes the more educated we are because we have more to hide, because we feel we have more to lose if someone actually sees that we're struggling in that area.
Yeah, that's a great point. You brought up something I'd love for you to highlight to the audience here. It's around this lipstick example, right? Could you walk us through what that means around this lipstick example, specifically around, when people are purchasing things and how their purchase practices show up in life?
I call it the lipstick rule, lipstick phenomenon around what happens when we are in the midst of a recession or we're in the midst of an economic downturn, that that the consumption of items like lipstick are recession proof because we all need a little fix, a little treat. And when we were having a conversation, I pushed forth that I think that the desire for us to consume lipstick during periods of recession is a construct that the same way that we now say, for example, you could liken it to that's for women. So, like, women are going to move toward buying beauty products to make themselves feel good. Who said that? Unless it was something that was manufactured and then we bought into that, saying that that is the truth. It only is because we say it is. But if we don't believe that we have power to deconstruct it and say, I wasn't thinking about lipstick before I saw that message, then it's not my message. It's someone else's message that they're trying to persuade me to believe or convince me to believe. And even similarly, look at conversations around, I know there's a big conversations around lattes and avocado toast. Like, don't tell people not to have their avocado toast or to have their lattes. And I would say, listen, if you have loved lattes before day one, have at her. But what lattes have become have been synonymous with simple luxuries. And who do you think benefits from that idea?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Who do you
absolutely. The people who
think
sell it. Yeah,
exactly, and if you were
yeah.
think you weren't thinking about no avocado toast, but now you're really indignant about, "I'm gonna have this avocado toast to prove that I can have some pleasure and joy." If you weren't thinking about avocado toast before the concept of avocado toast came up, is that really your story? Is that what really gives you the simple pleasure? Because 'Cause we're talking about simple pleasures, then go back to your values. What actually gives you simple pleasure? It could be knitting. It could be eyebrows. It could be, anything else but the major things that people always go to. If we're all going to it, is it really our desire or is it someone else's that's convinced us and we just happen to copy it? And so, I don't mind me a latte. Quite frankly, I like lattes, don't get me wrong, but the idea that stopping people from having lattes or having lipstick or having the avocado toast is just very ironic that we want the same things.
Yeah, I loved it when you brought it up. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
you bringing that here. Would love to now talk a little bit about your book. So
Yeah.
in your book, you talk about healing your relationship with money in 28 days. Give us a maybe let's say day one in 2 minutes from your 28-day method and a do this or don't do this
Mhm.
trap that people don't do this trap that people may fall into on day 3 through 7 or something like
Yeah, day one is really helping you realize that money is not logical only, it's emotional, and being open to opening yourself up to think about those memories that may be uncomfortable or you never thought about, or, it may sound a little bit woo woo. And I'm equal parts woo woo and practical. So it's not something that doesn't have a grounding in psychology or doesn't have a grounding in lived experience. And so, day one is really about, hey, do you know that you have emotions around money? And similar to the question that I asked you earlier, what are some of the words or feelings or memories that you're associated with money that are the most salient, the most memorable? Those are the ones that you really want to unpack because those sometimes linger with you as an adult. So I would say, what are the top 5 memories that come to your mind? How do they make you feel? They make you feel disempowered. Who were the players? What were the messages that those players gave? And do you still follow those beliefs, or you kind of replaced them and swapped them out for your own, or have you realized that they were helpful and you continue with them? And I say the things to avoid is, I think for a lot of people, "Oh, I wish I would have done this earlier," but you did it. So what? Right? Like
that.
if you the concept of healing your relationship with money comes at 40 versus 20, what are you going to do? Be mad at yourself for 20 years that you didn't do it? The time is now. So sometimes what I think people do is like they create this another level of shame that I wish I could have done this faster and earlier. But there's no guarantee that you would have been able to accept and do anything with the message until you have all those lived experiences, you know? And so I would say that that's one thing. I think the second thing is reading it and not doing the activities is something I would maybe recommend that you don't do because it's a lot of reflective work. So you get a lot of reflection and power out of actually doing the work. It's not a passive experience to read through your relationship.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And also in a lot of your writing, you talk about abundance and self-love as being inseparable from financial health. Can you expand on that connection for the audience?
Yeah, I think that when we think about self-love, it's a thing that you experience. A thing, I feel like it's a level that an understanding about what you need, not being afraid to advocate for yourself, which draws a line between what you will and won't allow, right? And so when it comes to someone that experiences self-love or is in the process of self-love, they look at things that create harm. This does not mean that you don't make mistakes. We're not talking about mistakes. We're talking about consistent patterns of doing something that will sabotage your happiness, sabotage your success, or sabotage your ability to reach your goals. And so when it comes to abundance, sometimes abundance is this idea of like having lots of money. But when I talk about the self-loving abundance and healing your relationship with money, a lot of things happen. You don't do certain things anymore. You don't do it for the gram. You don't do it for grandpa. You don't do it for grandma. You don't do it for anybody else because you know that what they believe is not as important as what you believe. And I think part of self love is being able to establish that everyone has their right to exist and follow their values as long as it doesn't harm other people, including yourself. And I think that once you're able to establish this level of self respect, self care, self attunement, that how you manage money will benefit from that too. Because not that money is an extension of yourself, but it's a tool to allow you to experience deeper and greater experiences with self-love. Like you don't want to have to do with the harm, the sadness, the stress of bankruptcy if you can avoid it, of having a credit card bill go into collections if you can avoid it. And so you start or so all those things are kind of related. And then so what ends up happening that you feel a level of abundance. There's probably more money in the bank, there's more things that you're doing that's aligned to your values. You have better boundaries, right? So the things that you don't want are further away from you. The things that you do want are closer to you, and you don't make any apologies for it.
I like that. Thinking about some lessons learned that you picked up across along the way. Looking back, what would you say is like the hardest belief you had to unlearn about money or success?
I feel like there's still some I'm still unlearning, but I would say that some of the ones that I think that I have unlearned is achievement and how much money I have define my worth. Because I
Good
think,
one.
yeah, I think that similar to what I said, like getting out of debt and then having these numbers in terms of salary, they gave me a temporary sense of self-worth, but then the dopamine left and then it was just regular. So what I have been able to do is respect and acknowledge money for what it can do, but then be very, very clear about what it can't do. Money cannot replace healthy relationships. Money cannot replace healthy thoughts. It can give you access to get a therapist to help you, do you know what I mean? But you can't buy love. No, but you can buy therapy or support to help you better understand yourself, invite people that you care about to repair relationships, but money itself can't do that.
And how has this journey shaped the way you see your own growth now, personally and professionally?
That having left a very structured environment as a school leader, I would be honest, it took me time. I wouldn't say grieve being that position, but grieve the structure, grieve the people around me in a lot of ways, but also grieve the idea. I had to, my ideas around work had to evolve because for all intents and purposes, when you look at the way I live in Ghana. I so I live in CDs, which that's the currency. I earn in dollars. So the need I'm from New York. So understanding what I really need to make to live happily and to still establish a solid financial foundation is a fraction of what I would need living in the States. And so that was a big mind warping for me because I don't have anything to push for. Like needs are met. So then I have to figure out what else. Who am I outside of work? Even who am I outside the Frugal Feminista? Because I had the being a vice principal, but now I have a new job, which is CEO and founder. But who am I outside of that? And I think that has been a nice journey of self discovery to up my journey and up my new understanding of what's next for me, what money means for me now, how can I use it better, and what my new values or more pronounced values are now that I'm in a different environment.
Makes a lot of sense. And for those who are listening, I loved for our guest to give folks advice so that they can move forward. Because a lot of people who listen, mid-career, sometimes later career, maybe thinking about a move but don't know what to do. And so someone who may feel stuck in financial dysfunction, and maybe in a role, and obviously having these things play out. What's the first step you tell them to take?
I'm not being funny, but I would say read my book, Heal Your Relationship with Money, or something similar to it, or get a therapist. If you feel that, if it's not an income issue, meaning that you make more than enough money, but there's a gap between where you wanna be and how you wanna use it, getting some type of support is I think a huge piece. Because I think that similar to what I said, we're quite capable, competent, smart people, and we automatically think that's automatically gonna transfer to how we manage and strategize with money, and that's not necessarily so. So I would say first is get help, whether it be and there's different levels. So you can get, self-study, a book, you can go to a course where you can have community, you can go to one-on-one, you can get a therapist, then, and then all at the same time. Because I've been in positions where I needed help with something and I got it at all levels because I needed that level of support. So I would say the first thing. Now, the second thing if I'm working a 9 to 5, and I'm thinking about relocating. I would secondly visit the place before I can only speak for myself. Jumping up and moving to a new place and then being like, oh psych, I gotta go back. That's not something I'm looking forward to. So I
Right.
would visit at different times. I would try and find community online just to kind of see what the realities of people similar to me are like there, but also kind of take that with a grain of salt because when you get there, you may have your own experiences. And then third, I would kind of create a plan and do a backwards design, including making sure one of the things I did make sure before I left my position as an assistant principal, my mindset, Brian, was I'm leaving here with something, right? And meant was I'm leaving here with everything. So what I meant by that was I did all the extra overtime I could, made sure my 401, well, this is a government agency, but whether it be your 401k, your 403b, your TDA is maxed out. So you becoming friends with your HR person to know how much can you put away and sock away for retirement, because in the back of my mind, I may not be in Ghana forever. So if I do return to the States, I still have to live at the quality of life that I had before I left, and making sure that those things are in place and that any financial security or vehicle that is due to me as an employee, I take advantage of it before I go. And then the fourth thing is to run the numbers. So the basics, what do you need to move away? Would you like say in Ghana, you have to sometimes pay 1 to 2 years in advance for housing. And so kind of knowing the rules and ins and outs of the country that you want to go to and what would be the minimum amount that you would need to move but stay abroad for a year, just to make sure that you give a chance to adjust. So I would say those four things, and I would say the final thing is what I've done is that I maintain my US accounts, meaning that I still plan as an American, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So my banking, my IRAs, all of my retirement plans, I still contribute to them in the same way that I did when I was an employee. And now I am able to do so with more ease because the change in cost of living. And that gives me a sense of peace because I feel like I can move back and forth without feeling like I have to play catch up because of any financial pauses or gaps that occurred.
No, I appreciate that. And looking ahead, what kind of impact do you still hope to make in this next phase of your career?
I'm just getting started. I really want to help as many people as I can. I think conversations around money often start at the spreadsheet or how can I get rich fast or it just kind of creates this scarcity and this urgency around money. And I want people to integrate this concept of healing as their way to wealth. That actually sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And that for a lot of us who come from humble beginnings, even those of us that came from wealth but have some shame and guilt around it, having a reckoning with those feelings and thoughts are going to be so important if you're going to align your desires with your actions. Because sometimes you can say you want one thing, but then your behaviors are really reflecting what you believe is possible or what you still believe, and just familiar patterns of possible, I wouldn't say this dysfunction is a strong word, but possible patterns of living someone else's narrative versus your own.
Yeah, no, I love that. And what's one question you have for me that I can hopefully answer?
Brian, so what would you say has been your journey with your relationship with money and creating this space for other professionals to think about exiting?
Yeah. So I think my relationship with money, I mean, you had me at frugal, right? And so, I've been frugal for many a years. I call it fiscally responsible.
I love that.
But yeah, so my relationship with money has been good. I think you know, I developed a strong relationship with it through my parents, right? And just being like learning about investing, learning about stocks and all those things. At times, I do sometimes feel like it can never be enough, right? Because everything is going up and all of that. But I feel like I have a pretty good relationship with money. As it relates to the show, I think it's interesting how a lot of time you would think that when people are leaving, that the money conversation would be truthfully top of mind. But as it relates to money and then career transitions, a lot of times, but the moves that people are making are often not about money. It's not about I need to do this because I need to make more. No, I need to do this from let's go back to some of the things you've been talking about, the humanity piece, right? Around what is it that like, what are my values, right? That's why I'm looking to leave. And so when I think about the things you talk about and a lot of the themes from the guests, money, of course, is going to be some point a thought when you transition jobs, especially when you have people who you support, whether it's you're a caregiver, you're a parent, you're a spouse, partner, whatever, that's going to be there. But I've often found it interesting that it's not, a lot of people aren't saying, I'm leaving because of the money. No, as I'm leaving because of the impact. And at times, yes, they can make more money. I've had people leave for less money, but peace of mind. And that is powerful because oftentimes the narrative is around how, money is everything, money, money, money. But I think a lot of the folks on the show, I think kind of buck that trend pretty wholeheartedly.
Think that's wonderful, and I think it really goes to show that there's other things that, like I said, they know what money can and can't do, and I think the other piece that it's just underscoring is sometimes some conversations force you to choose one or the other, and what I'm saying is before you go, make sure as an employee of X amount of time that you're aware of what you can leave with. So whether you decide to take a career break or to move into something that has less income or whatever it is. It really doesn't matter the justification. The idea is that you work there. These are things that were a provision for you as an employee, that you make sure that as part of your exit strategy, that if even if you choose the peace, choose the joy, choose the humanity, that it doesn't counter being able to have those little systems in place for yourself. Because if you decide to leave that position too, it's just a behavior of relating to am I organized? Have I thought about all the things before I go? Instead of kind of saying, well, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, is I was very proud of myself that in addition to doing good work, I made sure I was as enriched as I could possibly be from the resources that were available for us as an employee.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, Kara, look, I want to thank you for joining the show today. I'm really so glad we connected online. It's the power of LinkedIn, of course. So I appreciate it. And I always have to preface it. They are not a sponsor at all, but I mean, a lot of my guests on LinkedIn. So would love for you to share where our listeners can support you and even buy your book.
Yeah, so here is Heal Your Relationship with Money. The best place to get it quickly is from Amazon. And you can just look up my name or the title of the book. And we can stay connected at the Frugal Feminista and on LinkedIn, Kara Stevens. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And if you wanted a free download of the first 3 days of Heal Your Relationship with Money, you can go to the Frugal Feminista /community and you can get an immediate access to it.
Awesome. So I will put all of that information in our show notes, and I'll just appreciate you sharing this knowledge. Look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Kara Stevens, the Frugal Feminista, for joining me today. Hope you all have a great week. Hope you picked up something informative, and we'll definitely see you next time. Kara, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for listening to Why I Left. Join us next time for more inspiring stories about growth, resilience, and transformation. Visit us online at www.whyiLeft.co. That's whyiLeft.co.